On April 13th, according to reports from various Chinese media outlets, a massive explosion rocked a city in Iran. This strike hit a strategic infrastructure link on the Eurasian axis with high precision. The target was not a simple civilian project, but an energy initiative valued at $18 billion. This bridge served as a vital component of the land-based energy transportation corridor across the region. Destroyed on the night of April 7th, the structure was more than just a transportation route. It stood as a symbol of the ambition to connect continents through the Belt and Road Initiative. Notable reports indicate that assets linked to China are becoming targets in an expanding series of attacks. These incidents are not limited to the territory of Iran alone. At least 3 infrastructure facilities invested in by China in Dubai, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have been struck. Many other projects in the region have been placed on high alert. This is no longer viewed as a series of isolated incidents. It appears to be a coordinated campaign targeting the investment network of Beijing across the Middle East. In this context, a significant question arises regarding the true extent of the damage China is sustaining. These losses explain why Beijing maintains such a cautious and restrained attitude toward Iran. The economic interests of China in the Gulf region far exceed its interests in Iraq. Any significant escalation could push the entire investment system toward a total collapse. Beyond regional concerns, this wave of instability directly impacts the broader ambition of internationalizing the Chinese currency. When energy and trade routes are disrupted, the plan for de-dollarization faces immediate obstacles. This makes the goal of restructuring the global financial order appear more fragile than ever before. The forces carrying out these attacks calculated their moves with extreme precision by targeting a bridge. They did not hesitate to deploy airstrikes to achieve their objectives. This was not a simple act of sabotage, but a direct manifestation of the fierce competition between major powers. When the target was hit, the consequences extended beyond the physical destruction of infrastructure. It sent a clear deterrent message regarding the control of energy and transportation routes. The night sky of the city was immediately stained red by the glow of the fire. Sirens pierced the silence of the space, followed by a series of rapid explosions that made the ground tremble. As the dust and smoke began to settle, the scene revealed a truly catastrophic level of destruction. The railway bridge was completely severed, with fragments of concrete and steel scattered everywhere. Large holes appeared in the body of the bridge as if it had been torn apart by an immense explosive force. The location of this bridge holds particular strategic significance. Situated only a few dozen kilometers from the capital, it serves as a direct connection between the political center and the southern seaports. This is a key link in the China-Iran transport corridor, ensuring the uninterrupted flow of goods and energy. Since May of 2025, this transport route has operated with high stability. It allowed goods from Jiang to reach Iran. This transit time is nearly 1/2 of what is required for maritime shipping. Beyond the economic benefits, this route plays a strategic role in ensuring energy security for China. It allows for the direct overland transport of oil without total reliance on maritime routes. Since sea lanes still carry the majority of global oil traffic, the risk of a blockade remains a threat. Therefore, this transcontinental railway is considered a vital backup option for national security. Its destruction has exposed a significant vulnerability in the energy strategy of the nation. The attack was carried out in the darkness with nearly absolute precision. This caused the entire northern railway line of Iran to fall into a state of total paralysis. The strike did not just cause a local disruption, but severed a strategic corridor between 2 major nations. This connection is seen as the lifeblood of the transcontinental trade and energy structure. The destroyed target was clearly not an ordinary piece of infrastructure. Those behind the attack understood the strategic value of the bridge and chose it to pressure the energy supply of China. When the transport route was cut, the risks to energy security increased immediately. This placed Beijing in a passive and difficult position on the global stage. The route was the result of an investment totaling $18 billion. It also contributed a significant portion to the total volume of imports for the country. Its disruption causes economic damage and shakes the foundation of a long-term strategy. This strategy was designed to reduce dependence on vulnerable maritime transportation routes. In the face of rising tensions, the reaction from China has shown a very calculated approach. Instead of using harsh measures, Beijing has chosen a path of rational and moderate intervention. The government has called on all parties to exercise restraint and avoid letting the conflict spiral out of control. At the same time, they emphasize the requirement to protect essential infrastructure. The reason for this caution lies in the fact that Chinese investments in Iran have become targets for the United States and Israel. Assets in other countries are also being affected. While Western powers often prioritize cooperation with Gulf states, China has remained steadfast in its own strategy. It seeks to shape the balance of influence after acting as a mediator. Recent developments have made it clear that the previously high levels of confidence are being tested. In the past, many believed that Chinese influence in the Middle East was rising. This led to the narrative that the East was rising and the West was declining. There were even predictions that Saudi Arabia might switch to using the yuan for energy payments. However, when Iran became the target of attacks, the regional situation changed immediately. In an environment of increasing instability, it is difficult for regional nations to avoid leaning back toward the United States. This situation exposes the limits of the strategic approach taken by Beijing. Maintaining investments and influence on all sides seems feasible but carries great risk during an escalation. The confidence in the ability to balance the interests of various parties has placed China in a difficult spot. When conflict hotspots erupt, the complexity of the situation becomes much harder to manage. Events show that maintaining a neutral stance in a volatile region is not a simple task. This is especially true when investments become direct targets of geopolitical competition. Therefore, the reaction of China should not be judged as a sign of weakness. Since 2017, Beijing has gradually established mechanisms to protect its interests abroad. They have been building the capacity to respond to risks in strategic regions. Every step of deployment is linked to the goal of protecting core national interests. Overseas investment is not just about economic gain, but is directly related to long-term security. In the current era, competition between major powers has moved beyond traditional territorial boundaries. The real battlefield now lies in energy routes, transport corridors, and global investment networks. Any weakness in these areas can be exploited by opposing forces. The conclusion of the initial analysis revealed a clear sense of ambiguity. It failed to provide a specific argument regarding how China would practically respond to the crisis. Beyond diplomatic statements calling for restraint, Beijing has not shown much substantive action. Asserting that interests will not be harmed sounds firm, but the reality on the ground suggests otherwise. With projects affected and the China-Iran transport route disrupted, the situation remains precarious. The question remains as to what China has actually done in this specific situation. The answer indicates a rather limited level of support provided to Iran. There are no signs that Beijing is willing to exert its full strength to stand by Tehran. Previous information about weapon-related materials or Western media reports on missiles occurred before the conflict escalated. These reports do not reflect the current reality of the situation. After the escalation of hostilities, the likelihood of China continuing such sensitive activities is highly doubtful. The reason lies in the much broader structure of interests that Beijing is pursuing. Iran is only one part of a much larger and more complex strategic picture. The Gulf nations are the true focus of trade and economic cooperation for the country. The scale of exchange between China and the Gulf region far exceeds that with Iran. This makes every decision one that must be weighed with extreme care. If China chose to support Iran in a strong and overt manner, the consequences would be severe. It could cause the entire group of Gulf nations to lean decisively toward the United States. That would mean Beijing losing its most important partners in its regional strategy. In recent years, the foundation of these partnerships has been a priority for the government. Any mistake in handling the Iranian issue risks breaking the entire strategic structure. From the perspective of core interests, the lack of strong support for Iran is almost inevitable. The notion that China stands firmly behind Iran is largely based on speculation. In reality, Beijing always maintains a certain distance from geopolitical hotspots. Even in the case of Russia, China has not publicly provided weapons or intervened directly in a military capacity. This reflects a consistent principle in the foreign policy of the nation. Leaning too heavily toward Iran would lead to serious negative consequences. Gulf nations could increase their resentment and adjust their relations in a way that harms Chinese interests. Maintaining a state of balance has become a mandatory strategic choice for the leadership. It is not due to a lack of decisiveness, but a requirement to preserve interests on a broad scale. Another major factor limiting support for Iran is the massive scale of Chinese investment in the Middle East. While Iran remains a partner, it cannot override larger regional interests. Following the pandemic, as economic growth slowed down, China increased its search for external opportunities. The Gulf nations became a primary focus for these expansion efforts. These economies are currently transforming to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. They are expanding into technology, infrastructure, and tourism, which are sectors where China has a clear strength. In the 2 or 3 years before the conflict broke out, cooperation between the two sides grew rapidly. This created a deep and wide network of mutual interests. However, the war in Iran has disrupted this entire structure and created new challenges. Debt crises in developing nations have made the resource-rich Gulf even more attractive. In this context, instability in Iran is not just a regional hotspot, but a shock to global markets. It directly threatens the stable environment that China needs to continue its economic expansion. President Donald Trump once revealed that Chinese officials had certain exchanges with Iran. However, in the current climate, the prospect of achieving a lasting peace remains fragile and unpredictable. Diplomatic signals are not enough to hide the fact that the region has entered a period of deep instability. Data from the American Enterprise Institute shows the scale of the commitment. Over the past 20 years, China has poured $2,700 billion into the Middle East. This figure demonstrates the immense scale of the interests that Beijing holds. These interests are not just economic, but involve risks to human personnel and investment safety. Energy supply remains a vital factor for the continued functioning of a large economy. There is a view that crisis can create opportunity when asset prices decline. This could theoretically allow China to expand its presence at a lower cost. However, the reality in the Middle East shows that regional nations are not passive observers. They watch closely to see which nations actually take action during a time of crisis. They distinguish between those who take military action and those who only issue diplomatic statements. In this environment, substantive support is worth far more than financial investment alone. For Middle Eastern nations, the top priority is not short-term economic gain. Their primary focus is on the maintenance of power and the stability of their respective regimes. Money can be replaced, but once power is lost, it is very difficult to recover. In the competition between China and the United States, regional nations make strategic choices. These decisions are not based on words, but on specific actions taken at critical moments. The representative of China to the United Nations has emphasized the desire for balance. The message called for the protection of transport routes and energy infrastructure. Some observers believe this message contained indirect criticism of the actions of Iran. This shows the caution in how China adjusts its position in a highly volatile region. The spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized that peace is the foundation for development. Beijing remains ready to expand substantive cooperation with Middle Eastern nations, including through investment. Behind these diplomatic statements is an increasing pressure on practical interests. The possibility of China encouraging Iran to enter negotiations is grounded in reality. This was a point previously mentioned by President Donald Trump during his time in office. The motivation for this is not just diplomatic, but stems from the need to protect energy supplies. China does not only rely on Iran, but imports from many other nations. Any spread of the crisis could create a dangerous chain reaction across the globe. If Iran drags other nations into instability, oil production could drop significantly. Disruptions at key points, such as Qatar, would cause damage that extends far beyond the region. It would have a direct and negative impact on the domestic economy of China. Therefore, Beijing has a clear incentive to pull Gulf nations back to a state of stability. They seek to restrain Iran and promote a dialogue that prevents further escalation. Protecting energy transport routes has become the top priority for all involved parties. And if these routes are cut, the main source of income for Middle Eastern nations would be affected. This would lead to profound consequences for the entire regional, social, and political structure. However, the reality on the ground presents a very concerning and dark picture. Infrastructure projects funded by China have become direct targets of various attacks. At least 3 major assets have been hit, causing significant concern for investors. Hotspots such as Dubai, Qatar, and Oman have all recorded incidents related to the conflict. 12 other projects are currently located in high-risk areas within the region. Before the conflict began, approximately 370,000 Chinese citizens lived in the United Arab Emirates. While over 10,000 have been evacuated, many have chosen to stay. This reflects the deep engagement of China with the region and the rising risks involved. A recent news report highlighted the reality on the ground through the story of Jiang. At 44 years old, he decided to remain in the Middle East despite the ongoing instability. He arrived in the United Arab Emirates last summer, leaving his son behind in China. He currently manages about 40 workers at a construction site in the region. His monthly income is approximately 15,000 yuan, which is 2 times higher than what he could earn. His choice reflects the strong economic pull that the region continues to exert. Even as air raid sirens sound almost every hour, his decision to stay has not changed. He noted that the Middle East is entering a massive wave of construction similar to China 1 decade ago. Opportunity still exists for those who are willing to take risks. This is not just an individual story, but evidence of the wave of labor and investment flowing into the area. The influence of China in the Middle East reached a high during the mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. This event was seen as a major milestone. It marked the increase of diplomatic influence on the regional stage. Since then, the role of China has shifted to a more cautious and discreet state. The attacks in October of 2023 and subsequent escalations have tested this role. The limits of Chinese influence have become more apparent as the conflict has deepened. Instead of deep intervention, Beijing has focused on calls for restraint and economic cooperation. This is viewed as a safer path given the complexity of the regional dynamics. Saudi Arabia, as the largest economy in the Middle East, continues to play a pivotal role. The country welcomes Chinese participation and has become a top partner in construction projects. Chinese companies are currently implementing a series of large-scale solar and wind energy projects. This consolidates their position in the energy transition of the entire region. Scholars observe that the Middle East has a massive demand for technology and development capacity. This is a gap that Chinese enterprises have been very quick to fill. In the United Arab Emirates, companies are deploying large-scale, battery energy storage systems. In Saudi Arabia, solar power plants and data centers are being constructed at a rapid pace. The presence of China is also felt strongly in the consumer market of the region. Chinese automobiles became one of the largest market segments in the Emirates during the previous year. However, the conflict in Iran has changed the perception of the Middle East. It is no longer seen as a simple land of opportunity, but as a complex environment with overlapping risks. The dangers are not just physical, but extend to strategic trust. Regional countries are beginning to ask questions about the true motives of Chinese involvement. They wonder if the activities are purely for business, or if there are deeper calculations. The situation is further complicated by the fact that Iran is a common rival for many Gulf nations. The Gulf states also have their own internal competitions and disagreements. In this environment, trying to maintain good relations with everyone has placed China in a difficult position. Any perceived bias can lead to suspicion regarding the reliability of Beijing. Despite these risks, projects in Israel, the Emirates, and Saudi Arabia continue to move forward. On April 7th, shortly after a drone attack near the Dubai airport, a worker posted a video. It showed that work was continuing as normal only a few hours after the incident. This reflects a reality where the flow of investment and construction does not stop for instability. Stories from the workers themselves reveal a harsh and difficult reality on the ground. Some workers shared how they have integrated air raid drills into their daily routines. More concerning is the reported lack of clear evacuation plans for some of the personnel. A worker in Israel mentioned that they had not received any evacuation instructions from the embassy. This situation was mirrored by many of his colleagues working in different sectors. Despite the security risks, the choice to stay is often driven by financial necessity. One worker stated that a year of labor in China would not equal what he earns in 1 month in Israel. This is a testament to the economic incentives that drive individuals. China sees not only the risks, but also the long-term opportunities that may arise from the crisis. Policies related to oil payments and shipping could be adjusted to enhance the yuan. This aligns with the ongoing efforts toward de-dollarization in the global economy. Controlling transportation and money flows has implications for the petrodollar system. This system has long been the foundation of the global energy and financial order. Future benefits will come with increasingly significant security risks that must be managed. Once the situation stabilizes, China may expand its influence, but it will face new challenges. Many experts believe that China will not withdraw from its positions in the Middle East. Instead, they view the current conflict as a major fluctuation that is largely out of their control. The only choice in this situation is to wait, adapt, and restructure. This explains why China does not take a definitive side or confront the United States directly. Any wrong move could shake the entire structure of the regional interests they have built.